everyone, I'm Major Garrett. Welcome to Pfizer Forum. Welcome to a special Republican National Convention edition of America Decides. Day 2 of the Republican National Convention is underway. Many delegates here telling all of us, myself, our CBS colleagues, that they feel more energized, more united than ever behind the 2024 Republican ticket of former President Donald Trump and Ohio Republican Senator JD Vance. Tonight, the theme, and of course, National Party conventions always have a nightly theme. This evening's theme, crime and the border. Safety is the umbrella term, and it comes, we should point out, as the investigation into the assassination attempt against former President Trump that occurred Saturday evening in Butler, Pennsylvania, continues, and if anything, is intensifying. I want to go now to our podium position on the floor of the Republican National Convention, where we find Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, tell me what you're seeing. Tell me what the atmosphere is as you look down on the convention and the delegates there assembled, and what you anticipate this evening as many Republicans seeking to win Senate seats in this election are due to speak to the delegates.
Hey, Major, great to be with you. I am just at this podium position. To my left is where you can actually see the speakers tonight, and we'll get to that in a moment. But, Major, there is a new accessory that these delegates have down on the floor here, and that is placards that say Trump Vance, the new ticket. And that is something new that we are seeing today, obviously, in light of that announcement yesterday. Today, as you mentioned, is going to be portraying Republican Party unity in the form of highlighting Trump's former rivals. You're going to hear from Ron DeSantis, the current governor of Florida, who challenged Trump for the nomination. Nikki Haley, who challenged Trump for the nomination, was the last person standing, actually, in this primary. And notably, she was not originally invited to speak. She was invited on Sunday rather, after the assassination attempt. So we will be eagerly looking to see the kind of message that she has, considering that a lot of people who were intending to speak have rewritten their speeches in light of what happened on Saturday. Nikki Haley was invited after that event. But an excited crowd here today, and a crowd that knows who the ticket is.
Right, exactly. And to your point about Nikki Haley, Caitlin, you spent a lot of time covering that campaign, talking to voters who gravitated toward Nikki Haley and still are probably at some distance from the Trump campaign and this ticket. How do you anticipate Nikki Haley will talk about Trump tonight and talk about those supporters of hers and how they should come back into the fold?
Well, that's exactly what I'm watching, Major, is whether and how she mentions Trump. In the final months of her campaign, she was very, very critical of Trump, questioning his fitness for office. And what's significant here, Major, you and I have been talking about a Republican Party that has come full circle around Donald Trump in the past 8 years. This is clear that this is not Nikki Haley's Republican Party. That was clear during the course of the primary, and especially on one of the issues that's going to be highlighted tonight, which is foreign policy. That's a huge, her position is a huge contrast to Donald Trump's, especially when it comes to Ukraine, and especially a contrast to JD Vance. So it'll be interesting to see how she's received by this crowd, because I've also covered a lot of Trump rallies where members of the base, those who have been firmly behind Donald Trump, really were angered by Haley staying in the race for as long as she did, and kind of viewed her as disloyal to the cause.
Caitlin Huey-Burns on the podium position. Thank you. We want to turn our attention to the podium itself, where Kari Lake, a Republican candidate for the United States Senate, is now addressing the convention.
Lying about President Donald Trump and his amazing patriotic supporters. Actually, guys, they lie about everything. They've lied about Joe Biden's health, the economy, the laptop, the border. I could go on and on and on. But the really good news is that every day more and more people are turning off the fake news. And that's right. And Americans are waking up to the truth about the disastrous Democrat policies pushed by Joe Biden and his favorite congressman, my opponent, Ruben Gallego. These guys they're full of bad ideas. Just last week, Ruben Gallego voted to let the millions of people who poured into our country illegally cast a ballot in this upcoming election.
Joining me now here is Robert Costa. And Robert, good to have you with us. As Kari Lake goes on with her speech, I just want to put one thing on the table. She talked about undocumented immigrants voting in U.S. federal elections. That is illegal now. It has always been illegal. There have been rare instances where that has transpired, but it is not a central problem in election administration in any state of the country, Arizona included. Robert, your impressions of day two?
Day two is just beginning. We're seeing now a spotlight on U.S. Senate candidates like Kari Lake in Arizona. You're going to hear a lot about the issues of crime and immigration tonight. But what I'm really watching is the appearance of former Ambassador Nikki Haley. She ran against Trump in the Republican primary race. And there's a history, as you know better than anyone, Major, about these conventions sometimes being a real spotlight of the tensions in a party, whether it's 1976 with Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford, or in 2016 with Senator Ted Cruz and then candidate Donald Trump. But what I've been told by Trump campaign officials is they expect Nikki Haley tonight, though this could always change, she could always throw a curveball. They expect an endorsement from her tonight that's enthusiastic. In the wake of the assassination attempt, they see a lot of unity in the party here on the convention floor and among the major players, too.
It is typical, Robert, as you well know, for speeches at a convention to be cleared by the nominee or those who represent the nominee. Has that transaction occurred in the Nikki Haley case? Do we have
it's very
insight into that?
The Trump people have been very scripted about this convention. They have a whole litany of speakers. Now, Ambassador Haley is someone who might want to keep her remarks relatively private and close to the vest. But I would be very surprised if Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles, the top campaign advisors, and Cliff Sims, who's helping with a lot of the speeches here, another Trump advisor, if they haven't seen it, I'd be stunned. I have no reporting on that. But this is a scripted convention as much as I've seen really the whole time I've been covering politics.
All conventions are scripted. This one intensely so.
2016 had a little fire.
Yes, a little fire into it. Very quickly, how do you think this convention hall will initially greet Nikki Haley? There are some delegates who are kind of skeptical of her.
And she was tough on Trump in the primary.
As Trump was tough on her in a personal way.
Very tough. I mean, he called her derogatory names. They haven't really had that peaceful moment. I think it's going to be interesting to see how she frames it tonally on message. And does former President Trump come out perhaps with her and raise the fist in the air and show real solidarity? The optics here, I think sometimes in politics, optics are overplayed, and it's really about action and it's about policy. But here tonight, optics do matter. Is the traditional Republican wing going to stand with Trump or not? She's here. Actions speak. But let's see what she has to say.
Always keep an eye on the optics. Robert Costa, thank you very much. I want to go down to the floor of the convention here in Milwaukee, where we can find and do find senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed O'Keefe, where are you, and what is the hat effort tonight on the floor of the convention?
Major, we're somewhere between New Hampshire and Vermont, which you can do geographically, and you can do it here as well on the floor of the convention. We're hanging by Vermont right now because, remember, that was the one state that went to Nikki Haley over the course of the primaries. And to answer your previous question, how do you think the crowd is going to respond to her? I think ultimately, if she delivers something like that Gin Blossoms hit they were just performing a little while ago, the cover band was, "Anywhere You Go, I'll Follow You," she'll do just fine. Anything short of that, and she may have problems. And so that is why there's so much intrigue and attention being paid to what she says tonight. Not unlike, for example, 8 years ago at around the same time on Vanquished Opponents Night, when Ted Cruz got to address the convention and did not explicitly endorse Donald Trump and got wildly booed by his supporters, which was the signal that this party was really in the midst of a sea change. So we'll be watching for the reaction of those here on the floor, the rank and file who are set to go out and knock on doors and make votes happen for Donald Trump. We'll also keep an eye on Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, who is set to speak as well, another vanquished opponent who would like to have a future in the national shape of the Republican Party. And then we'll keep listening to these Senate candidates as well. Interesting that Kari Lake was the first one up, which means she got the earliest time slot, farthest away from prime time. Why is that? There are concerns among GOP leaders that she may not pull it off. Polling suggests she's trailing her Democratic opponent, Ruben Gallego, may even be dragging down Donald Trump to some extent in a critical battleground state. Major?
Ed O'Keefe from the convention floor, adroitly and cleverly giving us a subtitle for this evening, Vanquished Opponents Night at the Republican National Convention. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much. Earlier today, my colleague Nora O'Donnell caught up with Eric Trump again on the floor of the Republican National Convention and asked the president's son about a lot of things, among them the assassination attempt on his father. Let's take a quick listen.
Is he having trouble hearing? Like, what else can you say about his health?
No, his ear hurts, and he's lucky. It was a bad skin, wound. But no, he's in great spirits. He's super excited about JD Vance. That was a lot of fun yesterday. He thinks he's the right guy, and I believe he's the right guy. And he's super excited to get out here on Thursday. It probably changed his message a little bit. I actually think that he's been pretty clear about that. He goes, I'm going to come out here and give the most unifying message I've ever given, because that's what this country needs.
Donald Trump carried Wisconsin very narrowly in 2016. Joe Biden carried Wisconsin very narrowly in 2020. Coming up, I will speak next with the former Wisconsin governor, Scott Walker, about the Trump-Vance ticket and Republican Party prospects right here in Wisconsin. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Fiserv Forum is the arena. The Trump campaign is hoping that it can flip the battleground state of Wisconsin. Of course it is. Back to red this November. As I mentioned before we went to break, won it narrowly in 2016, lost it narrowly in 2024. I think some prescient insight into this matter. I want to bring in someone who knows a lot about Wisconsin politics. Wisconsin former Governor Scott Walker, who ran against Donald Trump in 2016. And I want to start there. Not that I want you to revisit that bitter period of time in your political life, but when you went into that campaign, you were known nationwide as the Republican Party's most successful fighter in battleground states against hostile Democrats and back and forth, and you'd won and defended a recall, and yet up against Trump, even against that fighter background, quickly vanquished. Tell me what that experience was like and what that told you about Donald Trump's hold then on the party and how it's extended to the present now.
Well, one, I joke I got out before I got a nickname. So on the lighter side of things, I had some fun with that. But seriously, I was a fighter against the big government special interest here in Wisconsin. I think I was maybe the Midwest version of Donald Trump. He's the nationwide version. But I saw early on that this guy was a guy who wasn't going to back down. He had a bigger-than-life personality, but that in turn helped him be a fighter. And where I saw the appeal, particularly in that 2016 election, not just in the primary, but here in Wisconsin, was he was viewed as a fighter for everyday people who felt forgotten by all the politicians, not just Democrat, but Republican politicians, many camps in Washington, D.C. I think that's what won him in 2016. I think a few of the suburban voters backed away from that in 2020 because of tone, not substance. I think the key is getting them back in 24.
All right, so talk to me about tone. There's an effort here to make the tone sound different than even the speeches written a couple of days ago would have sounded. Smart?
Yeah, I think it is. Well, I think even look at the format of that last presidential debate. I was one of the few Republicans when it was announced in May to say this is great for Donald Trump because it not only afforded him the opportunity to be quiet and polite, if you would, during Joe Biden's response, but that people would hear President Biden's response. I think that worked to his advantage. Now, I think in the days since then, he's been amazingly, strategically pretty quiet up until this week. And even last night, kind of taking it all in. I was a kid when Ronald Reagan was shot. I know how it moved me and moved the country at that time. I hope it had a similar impact. Because Ronald Reagan said it was divine providence, the DP, that really didn't change his ideas, but changed the course of his presidency. I hope it has that kind of impact on Donald Trump. And he talks about that on Thursday night. Because I think there's a lot of voters who haven't closed the door on voting for him, but want to see not only who he is and what he stands for, but what kind of an impact that sort of life-changing experience has.
Break it down for this audience, Governor Walker. The counties in Wisconsin and the margins that you're going to be watching every day from now until November 5th.
Yeah, you've got Milwaukee and Madison, two biggest cities. Milwaukee, traditional blue-collar Democrat city, but on the margins you can do well. He makes inroads in the black and Hispanic community. That's big. Madison, very, very liberal. They still have Bernie Sanders signs up from 2016. The suburbs historically been Republican, not as by the same margins as the city, but he did well in 16 and 2020. He slipped a little there.
Why did he slip in 2020?
All tone.
All tone.
You look at people who like the policies but didn't like the chaos, didn't like the tweets, didn't like the other thing. A lot of them are having buyer's remorse because their gas is up, their groceries is up, their mortgages are up. Those are real challenges. In the northwest and western parts where Sean Duffy, other members of Congress are now at once Democrat areas, those margins went up for Trump. If he holds those areas and can make just a bit of inroads in the suburbs, which I think he can, fight for them on high prices, that's the key to winning.
The polling data here in Wisconsin has been toggling back and forth in the narrowest of margins, 1 or 2 points. What do you think the state of the race is in Wisconsin right now?
I think it's razor thin. You know, I won 3 times, each with barely over 52, 53% of the vote, and that was generally considered to be a blowout in Wisconsin. So this will probably be another race below 25,000 votes out of nearly 6 million people in this state. They have the financial advantage big time. Massive amounts of money spent on grassroots efforts on the doors, by paid staff, by paid campaign offices. The latest public poll shows the enthusiasm for Trump is much higher with the electorate who are voting for him. Republicans, those of us involved like myself in the campaign, have to go and stoke that enthusiasm to make up for the financial advantage of the Biden-Harris campaign.
I care a lot about election administration in this country. I've written a book about it. You had close elections in Wisconsin. You had a long history of high participation, visibility and transparency in election administration. Are you confident about the system in Wisconsin and its resilience and its believability in what is clearly going to be another close election in the state?
It is. I think that's why, again, we got to get out full force. The bottom line is we want to have transparency is the key word. Have open, if there's changes, modifications, be out front, talk about what it said, let people know.
Right.
And I think in the end.
No problem with pre-election litigation. Have the rules established so everyone gets a chance to fight their way in court. And then when those rules are established, follow the rules.
We're near Lake Michigan. I've said repeatedly after elections, trying to deal with something after the fact is like spitting in Lake Michigan. You want to go to court now. Make sure that every county official, every election official is following the state statutes to the T. And then go and have good elections and let the best candidate win.
What do you think JD Vance does to the Trump messaging in Wisconsin?
Well, it helps he's a Midwesterner. You know, we're in the Big Ten. We have a little bit of a clash between Ohio State and the University of Wisconsin.
I've heard about that. I think I read about it in the papers.
Exactly. But that aside, although it's like siblings. You know, you fight amongst yourselves, but somebody messes with someone in the Midwest, we're going to rally around. But seriously, I think a bigger thing to me than just the geographical significance is the fact of his life story. You know, in this state, like every state across America, when I was governor, one of my biggest, toughest issues, cross-party lines, was addiction.
Still is.
So you think of JD Vance and you think of his very personal story about his family, drug addiction, abject poverty, all those challenges. I think that fits in with Donald Trump saying, I'm fighting for forgotten men and women of this country. A lot of them are in families like JD Vance's.
In part of that Trump message, there is an immigration appeal that says he will engage in the largest deportation in the history of this country. Millions of people possibly put in temporary camps. Some people call those concentration camps. Are you in favor of that? Does that sound too aggressive for you and for voters here in Wisconsin?
Well, I think the bottom line is we got to stop. We got to secure the border. There's a big difference between the millions of people who came in here legally on a work visa and maybe extended or expired that, and that's a separate issue to deal with, versus what we see, which is a full-scale invasion. And I
You
worry,
are comfortable with that term invasion?
I am. If you've got a border that open, we don't know who's coming in. I'm all for, I proudly tell with the young people I work with at Young America's Foundation, I'm proud of our immigrant past. I'm proud of the fact that America has more than 1 million people who legally immigrate to America every year. We have 4 times more foreign-born citizens than any nation in the world. I'm proud of my immigrants, and I'm proud of the people who recently came here. So it's not about immigration. It's about knowing who's coming in. And I look at that southern border. I've been there with Greg Abbott. I've been there repeatedly. We have people bringing in drugs like fentanyl. It could be just up the road here. It could be anywhere else in the country. Fentanyl is killing our young people, and that's why it's such a critical issue.
Governor Scott Walker, I appreciate the time and your insight. Thank you very much. Some familiar faces. Well, wait a minute. What to expect from former presidential candidate Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and Vivek Ramaswamy. That's coming up next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides and our continuing coverage of the Republican National Convention. I want to take you directly to the floor. This is David McCormick, Republican candidate for Senate in Pennsylvania.
But you probably don't know him because he does nothing. For 18 years, Bob Casey has been warming a chair and drawing a paycheck. He is a do-nothing, out-of-touch, liberal career politician. And when he votes for Joe Biden's tired old ideas. Casey's been around so long that the #1 song when he was first elected was the Macarena, right? Does everybody remember the Macarena? But sadly, this is no joke, because politics is about choices, and the policies of Biden and Bob Casey are dangerous for Pennsylvania and America.
That's David McCormick on the floor of the Republican National Convention. He was, we should point out, with former President Trump Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania, and talked in his opening remarks about that experience. I want to bring in national political reporter for the Washington Post, Sabrina Rodriguez. She joins me here. Sabrina, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. It's an open-ended question. Take it in any direction you prefer. Impressions so far now that we're into the early part of day 2 of the Republican National Convention.
It's all about the energy. I can't get past, I think we saw it from the second we got here yesterday and the event started. I mean, the amount of energy in this room. I think there was an open question given the assassination attempt what exactly the mood would be. If there would be sort of a darkness to it and, you know, a sadness or anything given what happened. And really, I mean, it's full steam ahead. People so enthused for Trump, so enthused now that he's announced JD Vance. And I think what's been interesting is talking to delegates here. I mean, we've seen in polling that as much as about half of the people in this country don't know really very much about JD Vance. I've seen that reflected even on this delegation with the delegates of people that don't know too much about him, but they're so all in for this Trump ticket that it doesn't really matter. They're all in and they support who he chose.
What they know is they like Donald Trump, and if Donald Trump says it's okay with me, it's going to be okay with them.
Absolutely.
And when you talk about energy, I agree with you. It is something you pick up on in any encounter with any delegate. And it's not the typical kind of energy I've encountered at conventions before. Because these are activists, these are delegates, these are people involved in the process. They sort of come with a pre-existing energy. But after Saturday, it feels, maybe this is an exaggeration, maybe not like your impressions of it, marrow deep.
Oh, for sure. This feels personal. There is such a strong, I hate to lean into, but there's just such a strong feeling against the administration, against Joe Biden, against Kamala Harris. And I feel like part of what I'm reconciling with right now in this is the rhetoric we've been hearing. You know, we've heard the president come out and say that he really wants to tone down the temperature. We heard Trump in the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt agree that there needs to be more unity. But in the same breath that I'm hearing delegates here talk about they want unity and they want the temperature down, they're also still saying how, you know, Joe Biden is a threat for the future of this country and how they would never want to see Kamala Harris be a president, and they're still using some of that really intensely charged rhetoric.
And we have about 30 seconds to go, Sabrina, so I don't mean to condense you overly, but tonight, Nikki Haley, what are you looking out for?
I mean, it's you know, she ended up getting a prime spot, which is already a question that we had going into this of what time slot, or if they would even invite her to speak. But really trying to hear what the message is she's going to give. You know, there are people in this room that were delegates supporting her. What is the message of unity? What is the message to the Republican Party, since she did have such a different vision from Trump on the future of this country?
No doubt, and the future of the Republican Party. Sabrina Rodriguez, national political reporter for the Washington Post. Thank you so very, very much. Here now to join us is Peter Hamby. He is the host of Snapchat's Good Luck America and a partner at Puck News. Peter, it's always great to see you. Sorry you're not here with me. I wish you were. You and I have been around the bend when it comes to politics. You know that conventions are commercials, they're advertisements, and there's always a sort of cynical side to politics and things that happen at conventions. Tell me what you're expecting to hear from Nikki Haley tonight, and how do you think this convention is going to react?
I'm definitely watching Nikki Haley's reaction closely. I mean, Sabrina said she was watching what Nikki's going to say. I certainly am too. But she, unlike Ron DeSantis, left the Republican presidential race with pretty high unfavorable ratings among Republican voters. Even though Donald Trump basically thumped Ron DeSantis in Iowa, at the end of the day, he didn't attack Donald Trump very much, and his numbers among Republicans and conservatives, his fave ratings were pretty good, Major. We were both out there together this cycle. Nikki Haley, however, called Donald Trump unfit for office. So we'll see what Trump loyalists in that room, or how they react to her. I'm fascinated to see that. I'm kind of fascinated Nikki Haley decided to show up. The other thing, really quick, I do want to mention too, is that a lot of these Senate candidates who are speaking tonight, Ruben Gallego, Sam Brown in Nevada, David McCormick, who we just saw, they are mostly running behind Donald Trump in these races, whereas the Democratic Senate candidates are running ahead of Joe Biden. So this is a good opportunity for them to introduce themselves to the country and maybe raise some money too if people like what they say.
Peter, really quickly, about a minute. One of the things that Puck News focuses on is the connection between politics and tech. Talk about JD Vance, connection to the tech world, and money for Trump.
I think that's a fascinating angle here, Major. Peter Thiel is a longtime JD Vance patron. He helped broker a meeting before JD Vance ran for Senate in a crowded Republican primary between Trump and Vance, and really was like, hey, you guys got to hash this out, because JD Vance had said some negative things about Trump in the past before. Thiel is just one of many Silicon Valley / venture capital types who have been backing the Republican Party in recent years, despite being previously a little more libertarian. But this is a sea change, Major, from the Obama years. Remember when all the tech people were for Barack Obama for Democrats? Now you see Mark Andreessen, you see Elon Musk, you see David Sachs, who had a speaking role at the convention. Tech people are really coming out for Donald Trump. Not the rank and file necessarily, and I work at a tech company as well, but these big executive VC types, the kind of podcast bros of the Silicon Valley world, are now lining up behind Trump, and I find that to be a fascinating shift.
Peter Hamby, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Major.
Silicon Valley billionaire Peter Thiel has donated millions of dollars to the Republican Party, as we just discussed. We will break down how that money helped launch Ohio Senator and now Vice Presidential nominee JD Vance to the top of the Republican ticket. That's next. You are streaming America Decides.
And I want to first acknowledge what transpired just a few days ago in my home state, where I witnessed firsthand from a front row seat in Butler, President Trump's remarkable strength and resolve in a terrifying and unpredictable moment. The president rose brilliantly to the challenge. But what a sad and frightening day for the families of those who were injured or lost, and for our great country. And we all thank God that President Trump is okay.
Welcome back to America Decides and our ongoing coverage of the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee. Thanks so much for staying with us. Money matters in politics, ladies and gentlemen. It's a fact. It may be an uncomfortable fact for you, but it matters. I want to bring in CBS News investigative reporter Dan Klaidman, who joins us here in Milwaukee at the convention. Dan, there was a report yesterday afternoon after JD Vance was announced as Trump's running mate that Elon Musk may stroke a check for $45 million a month to a newly formed pro-Trump super PAC, meaning a super political action committee. Talk to us about the money that JD Vance might have avenues to that could be instrumental for the Trump campaign.
Well, look, that is stunning on multiple levels. First of all, just the amount. All of a sudden, sort of out of nowhere, Elon Musk, richest man in the world, but he had not given a lot of money to politics. And now he's within the top 5 or 10 all-time donors to presidential campaigns or re-election efforts with this staggering amount of money.
If it comes through, it's a pledge.
If it comes through, but it's a pledge, $45 million a month. That is a lot of money. And what's also interesting about it is you now have the emergence of these tech people who are not the traditional, more liberal-minded tech people, but actually kind of anti-establishment, more conservative tech people who are starting to pony up and give real money to Donald Trump. That may be a real shift that's worth paying attention to.
Now, the big tech firms, now they're not necessarily in the big tech firms, they're sort of in that world, but there's been a tremendous conversation about the big tech companies getting too large and antitrust action, regulatory action being taken against them. Is this a hedge against that, or is this a way to expedite the shrinking of some of their rivals?
Look, with Elon Musk, it's hard to know. You know, it could be philosophical. I mean, you see his politics have been evolving for a long time now, and he is all in with Donald Trump, and he is pretty negative about Joe Biden. Whether it's a hedge, whether it's about business interests, you know, we don't really know. You know, the interesting thing is he stayed on the sidelines for a long time. Some people think that because of his business interests, particularly SpaceX, that he really depended on government subsidies. And if you start giving money to one candidate and not the other, that candidate doesn't get in office, you may be in trouble. But SpaceX is so big, the U.S. government is so dependent on SpaceX now that he doesn't really have that much risk to worry about. So, you know, my guess with Elon Musk is it's philosophical at this point. It's ideological. Now, there may be some benefits to giving this kind of money to someone who might be president that is, you know, in a business sense. But I'm not sure that's what this is about.
Dan, do you have any sense that JD Vance is an accelerator to this conversation or a new avenue opening up for the Trump world?
Look, JD Vance has been assiduously courting billionaires and tech billionaires in particular for a long time. He is a very savvy politician who understands how important money is. The main example, which I wrote about for CBS News.com, is Peter Thiel, also a kind of iconoclastic, more conservative tech entrepreneur. He bankrolled JD Vance's Senate campaign to the tune of $15 million. That is a lot of money. JD Vance knows how the game works.
Dan Klaidman, thank you so very much for your expertise. I really appreciate it. If Donald Trump, up next rather, as the prompter rolls for me, I certainly hope, my interview with National Republican Chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Steve Daines. That's coming up next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Earlier, I spoke with the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Senator Steve Daines of Montana, about the impact of the attempted assassination of former President Trump over the weekend and other political matters. Talk to me about where you see the momentum for this party, for this ticket after day one of the convention.
Well, I'll tell you, you can sense the enthusiasm, the excitement, the unity as this party is really coming together behind President Trump and now as Vice President nominee JD Vance. But I tell you, I think the emotion here coming off of the assassination attempt on Saturday, it can't be overstated. You know, there was that incredible moment Saturday where, you know, assassin's bullet was a quarter-inch off of either making this a memorial service or a national convention. I mean, it was a quarter-inch separated, one of two outcomes here, and here we are, thankful for God's protection of President Trump and the fact that we can be here, nominate him as our president's nominee, and win in November.
Good news for former President Trump, tragic news for one victim and two others who were wounded and are still holding on to life.
Look, I mean, it was a fire chief lost his life, an innocent, somebody going to a political rally,
right.
And nobody would have thought you go home dead. And then you had the two other rally goers there that are still, you know, wounded and healing up.
What effect do you think that will have on political campaigning for the rest of this cycle, Senator Daines?
Well, clearly it changes the whole security posture.
And not just for the former president and President Biden, but for senatorial candidates.
Yeah, well, I mean,
are you having conversations about that?
Well, I think there'll be a heightened security presence at events and so forth. But look, democracy is going to continue to move forward. We are proud of the fact we have a nation here. We have access to our elected officials. And, we had, a deranged individual in Pennsylvania to try to take out the President of the United States. We're going to move forward here 3.5 months, so we want to make sure the voters expect to interact with their candidates, interact with elected leaders.
Senator Daines, when you talk about unity, do you mean intra-party Republican unity, or do you mean something that is an appealing message outside of the Republican Party?
Yeah, well, I think the step one is always to unify a party, and we are unified. I can't say that was true a year ago, but now the party is coming. We've got Nikki Haley speaking. There's an example of bringing unity together, Ron DeSantis. And so the party is unified. I think President Trump has an opportunity on Thursday night now to expand that unity and think about unifying the nation. The country is yearning for a strong leader and one that will bring a unifying kind of message. And what I've heard from President Trump is he tore up his speech he planned. We're going to have a different speech on Thursday night.
On our air last night on CBS special coverage of this event, Michael Whatley, the party chairman, Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, both told us that they were told by President Trump to rewrite your speeches. Will Senate candidates who are appealing for voters tonight have rewritten speeches tonight?
Well, look, I think there's always a contrast that needs to be painted clearly around the positions. Let's keep it focused on policy, not on personality. And I think that's what our Senate candidates will be talking about, because the policy gap here is large in terms of visions for this country. The candidates have every right to paint that contrast, but let's do it in a way here that's focused on policy and not personality.
Former President Trump in this very campaign has described Democrats as communists, Marxists, fascists, who are criminals who steal elections and try to destroy the country. Is that the kind of rhetoric you see receding after this moment in Saturday in Pennsylvania?
Well, the rhetoric cuts both ways on that in terms of both parties, but I hope there will be a temperature decrease. The country is looking for that. And leaders have a task here of setting the tone, setting the temperature. As we say, we should be more thermostats than thermometers. We can take the temperature down.
Talk to me about JD Vance and very important Senate campaigns in Wisconsin here. Obviously, Milwaukee's in Wisconsin, and Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
So, JD Vance is somebody I got to campaign for back in 22. Got to know him very well as a colleague. JD Vance brings a couple of things. Number one, my father's a Marine, but he said JD Vance will be the first U.S. Marine to serve as vice president. Our veterans will certainly rally behind that. But JD Vance has a great American dream story. He really growing up on the other side of the railroad tracks. Of course, his story that's been a New York Times bestseller, coming from poverty, divorced parents as a toddler, raised by his mom's third husband, goes to Ohio State University, goes to the Marine Corps, and he'll tell you that straightened him out. And then on to Yale, very, very bright. But here's, I think, the appeal that JD has. He appeals to what we call lunch bucket Democrats. So Democrats that I grew up with in Montana. My grandpa Daines was a diehard lunch bucket kind of Democrat. JD Vance would have an appeal to somebody like that. They feel like they've been left behind by the Democrats' agenda.
Bigger than President Trump or complementary to President Trump?
I think it complements, but I think his unique story is something that very few members of Congress have. And I'll tell you,
certainly President Trump doesn't have.
He doesn't. So Trump has the appeal, but I think JD Vance has the story. He can uniquely relate to those voters. But look what it does in Ohio. I got to believe Sherrod Brown was not happy to hear that JD Vance is going to be the vice president, because JD Vance knows Ohio. That's going to put, certainly give a spring in the step there, Bernie Moreno, our candidate in Ohio. But look at places like Pennsylvania, like Michigan, like Wisconsin. Again, lunch bucket Democrats looking for a home. JD Vance provides that kind of relatable story.
Steve Daines, Senator from Montana, Chairman of the Republican Senatorial Committee. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Glad to join you.
Earlier, I spoke with our Camilo Montoya Galvez about the impact of immigration and the attendant issue of crime and immigration on the presidential campaign. Camilo, as you well know, for Republicans and for former President Trump, one of the prisms by which their voters and the former president view crime is through migrants crossing the border. Yeah. Explain to our audience what the facts are. What do we know?
That's right. Well, as you know, former President Trump is yet again making immigration a major pillar to his presidential campaign in his bid to return to the White House. And there have been record numbers of migrant crossings along the U.S.-Mexico border under the Biden administration. That is true about 8 million migrant encounters. That is a fact. But not every single one of those encounters equals an individual migrant Major, because many of these migrants are crossing the border multiple times illegally and are being counted multiple times on those tallies. It is also important to underscore that not every migrant who is processed is allowed to stay. The Biden administration has actually, unbeknownst to a lot of people, carried out over 4 million deportations, expulsions, and returns of migrants. So half of those encounters have actually resulted in migrants being kicked out of the U.S., but it is still a major issue. We have seen a recent decrease, a sharp decrease in illegal crossing since President Biden made most migrants ineligible for asylum under that executive action. And since then, we have seen Republicans pivot to another immigration concern, and that is of crime, tying immigration and crime into one issue politically. They are highlighting some heinous crimes, committed by undocumented immigrants here in the U.S.
But statistics show, if I understand this correct, Camilo, over and over, and this is something that I've told that analysts agree across the board, Republicans and Democrats who look at this ideologically, that migrants commit fewer crimes than Native Americans across the board.
The data is not very comprehensive on this question, Major, but the analyses that are available do not show that migrants are committing crimes at a higher rate than native-born American citizens. In fact, Border Patrol data actually shows that criminals make up a very tiny fraction of the people who are processed crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. And anecdotally, I can tell you that most of the migrants I've met here in the U.S. and across the border are people who are fleeing desperate circumstances, whether it's poverty, whether it's violence. They may not qualify for asylum, but they're certainly not criminals or terrorists.
Camilo Montoya Galvez, thank you so much for those facts, that perspective, as always. In the wake of Saturday's shooting, calls for unity are growing louder, a move that is being welcomed by parents on either side of the political aisle. Our Caitlin Huey-Burns spoke with some earlier today.
We went there to have a good time, and, you know, kids wanted to see the president. We were in the grandstand. We heard the first thing I was thinking about. I said, who the heck brought fireworks in here? And then I turned around, and my grandkids were already ducked down, and so I got down real quick.
Have you talked to your kids about this kind of possibility before?
We've talked about it in like a school setting. You know, that was always a fear that I have. But as far as just being out in public, I've never really talked to them about that.
So you almost expect a school shooting at this point, but not at a political rally.
Right. But I've told them, you know, now I'm never letting them go to anything political ever again.
I can imagine them not wanting to be involved in this at all. But we need them to be involved so that they can change it. It was unsettling before the assassination attempt. I feel like everything's getting very heated and very angry and violent.
How do you balance the idea of like wanting your kids to be able to be kids and experience things, but also being kind of fearful of all of this?
Right. You just let them do it. I mean, there's nothing I can do. I want them to live their lives, so they're not going to be sheltered. But, you know, in the back of your mind, you're hoping this is not the last time I'm dropping them off.
Do you think the temperature can be toned down?
I do. I think if you had the right leadership and the right mindset, maybe I'll kind of figure this out.
I don't want them to live in fear. I want them to, you know, be able to have their own opinions on who they would want for president and not have to worry about getting hurt over it.
That does it for me tonight. Please stay with us after the break for a CBS News special report, live coverage of the Republican National Convention. And join us again tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for our coverage of Day 3 of the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee. You are streaming America Decides.